This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, this is Richard Hart from the Sauhegan Local Advisory. You mentioned something happening in Milford, and I think I may know what it is that you're talking about, and perhaps I can describe the problem that we saw if you'd like to hear it. There was a fairly large piece of land along the river. Flat. It was a hayfield for many years, and someone bought it quite a while ago, and wanted to turn it into a golf course. That fell through, and this past year he sold that land to a developer. The developer came in, and we were surprised to see that that hayfield had a buffer, a lot of trees along the river, which is protected by a lot of local and state rules. However, the forestry rules for cutting timber don't follow those rules for buffers along rivers and wetlands. So they went in under a forestry application to cut those trees that were right along the edge of the river. They cut them all down, pulled all of the stumps up, and flattened it out. So now there's nothing there along the river, and it's a fairly long stretch of the river. And we did a lot. I think Tracy knows about this. We asked questions up in Concord to see what there was we could do. And basically it appears there was nothing that we could do. So we've ended up with a big stretch of the river without any buffer at all, and all of the trees and roots gone. So that's what happened here, and something that perhaps we should watch out for along other rivers.
And Richard, was this in Milford and the Suzanne Fournier? There were several appeals filed, like, you know, she picked up different parties, or she was secondary and someone else was primary. But all in all, I think there might have been 3 or 4 different appeals parties relative to that property. Is that the same one?
I think it was. It was in Milford. I know the Conservation Commission in Milford was doing something, and we were in the local advisory as well, or at least asking what the possibilities were. And perhaps the town, maybe the planning board or something was involved as well. I don't know how far it stretched within the town of Milford. I don't live there, so I just heard about it through the LAC discussions, our local meetings.
Hi.
I was just going to say, I don't know if that's the same project or not, because those trees were just cut this spring. And I think some of this has been going on longer than that.
Okay,
although I
so
know
maybe
that the issue on this property has been going on for quite a few years, but it may be actually a different situation in Milford, because trust me, they like to build stuff here.
Oh yeah.
This is Jen. I believe the property relative to the AOT appeals is the Brock property, the former gravel pit in Milford.
It is.
Okay.
All right.
You are.
And this one with the golf course land is a different place.
Yeah, we heard, the Water Council heard several appeals over the last, I want to say, year and a half, maybe going on 2 years. And it was a former gravel pit. I agree, Jen. And there was a lot of discussion about snakes and turtles and several other
The eastern hognose snake?
Yeah, and I don't mean to get down in the weeds on just this one project, but, you know, sitting on the Water Council and hearing the appeal, I'm aware of it, and then it's going to change the landscape, no pun intended, of how, you know, when an LAC looks at an AOT permit and what's going to be allowed and what isn't. Things are going to be very different, and I think it's cause for concern. It's a complicated issue because it's law and rule, but like I said, that's all I'm going to say for now. I apologize if I'm monopolizing it, but I think that the more you learn about this, the more you're likely to be concerned about it.
Well, it sounds like there's interest in this topic, and so we can certainly dig into it, see if we can find out a little bit more about the details of what has changed and what is being proposed for change, and get that all back out to you. And then potentially, if people want to get together and talk about it in a forum similar to this, we can see about doing that as well. Does that sound fair? I see a few nods. Okay. All right. So moving on. One of the questions that I have for everybody is, this has been a crazy summer for river and lake use. There have been people everywhere. There's been, unfortunately, trash everywhere. How's everybody dealing with that issue? Is that hopefully it's getting better, but is that something that people want to talk about at all?
I will
do something about it.
I will say very quickly, as the president of the Rivers Council, I received a call from some concerned people up on the Baker River, kind of describing, Tracy, that it was a really, rough summer, and people were coming from all over, and, human waste, toilet paper bags, and there really appear to be any kind of authority that people could call to try to work, tried local health officers, police, but it seems like there's some kind of hole in the use of informal access areas on rivers. We all know are the most common ways that people interact with the river. So I don't know if anybody else heard about those or were involved with them directly, but it seems like that's something, either legislatively or municipally, that there's this gaping hole in how you can get people to stop doing this.
I can add something for the Sauhegan River. Has a fairly new park right on the Sauhegan River, and it turns out to be a great swimming hole. And because swimming holes are closed in Lowell and Hudson and various other places, it turned into a mess. And they ended up closing the park, and they've decided they're going to build a fence to keep people from getting to the river. The LAC has opposed that and asked them to reconsider. But we also asked them not to do it in the first place. So we'll see what. I haven't heard any responses. The park is open again now, and there's no problem. Obviously, there's no involved.
Jane, you look like you had a comment earlier. Muted.
I'm in Manchester, and at the mouth of the river, it's pretty clean. I mean, there is a park there, and people are respecting the park. It looks great. But I think it would be the conservation commissions that would be notified if people are defecating near a river.
This is Judy, and from the Pemmy River, and we had a report from one of our members, Lisa Donner, who is part of the Baker River Committee, and they discovered all sorts of a campsite, camping park that was dumping all of their sewage into the Baker, and they discovered it because they've been doing E. coli tests. and they were able to shut it down, at least temporarily, using local authority. But as part of the PEMI, we're concerned about the confluence of the Baker and the PEMI and what all this high E. coli is in the PEMI. So yes, we've noticed a big difference on the Baker River, and it's potentially affecting the PEMI.
Hi, this is Myrtle from the PEMI, and I'm involved in the VRAP, the Volunteer River Assessment Monitoring Program. And I'm wondering if you can respond about the DES lab. We were scheduled to do many Coliform and other characteristics monitoring through that lab, and the lab was essentially shut down. And the concern I had was we needed it more this year than ever, just because so many people were there and the impacts could have been very real in terms of fecal matter in the river. Other labs seem to have found a way to stay in operation. Can you explain what was going on with the DES lab for coliform and E. coli sampling?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. And we had a preview of this, so I got in touch with Ted Walsh, who runs the Volunteer River Assessment Program. And basically, there were two things going on. The primary one was simply COVID and the fact that the situation in the lab itself is very tightly, it's very small space in terms of where the people physically have to work in the lab. And so we could not have as many people, actually, it wasn't in it, this actually was not DES. All those samples are run by the Department of Health and Human Services in the lab that we share with them. So this was a Health and Human Services decision to greatly cut back on the samples that that they were taking. They were still doing some emergency ones and a few other odds and ends, but they just simply did not have the space for the number of staff required to run the number of samples that we normally did this year. The other issue was budgetary, and we've been asked to make some pretty significant budget. We were told not to spend any money basically this year because of all the money being spent to support COVID and all the unemployment and all that.
So wouldn't that have been considered an essential service to support COVID?
I think
people are in the rivers.
I think we have a good argument now. At the time when that decision was made was, probably back in April and May. We didn't realize how much use the rivers and lakes were going to get. I think this year, this next time around, we have a good argument for saying this is an essential service. We do need that, although we still have the issue of how do we physically run those samples in the lab and keep the individual lab technicians safe. So, we were adjusting on the fly as best we can. There were, they changed the drop-off procedures at the lab for those samples that were able to be brought in, so that you were not seeing people personally. You were dropping them in a cooler and then somebody was going out and picking them up in a cooler, that kind of thing. We don't know what next year is going to look like, but I think we do have a reason to make sure that the sampling does happen next year, given the amount of use our rivers and lakes saw this year and the number of problems we really saw.
So DES honestly didn't think people were going to rush to New Hampshire to get in the rivers? I mean,
I am not able to speak for DES as a whole.
Okay, well, enough said. I was a little surprised that they weren't a little more innovative. Other labs, alter shift, and maybe do other things.
Again, a lot of this decision making.
It's not DES's lab. It's the public health laboratory is Tracy said, it's run by Health and Human Services. So, however we, think that it makes sense or doesn't make sense what happened to protect staff, it wasn't ever a DES decision.
Okay, pardon my venting. I totally understand.
So I get it. And I think also Health and Human Services at the time was also prioritizing, hey, we have to actually run COVID tests. And that was a priority for quite a while. So any other thoughts on this subject, or are there other subjects that we should address? I see people raising hands. Dan?
I just thought I would add to that. My wife is the secretary of the board for the Forest Society, and they've also had terrible problems in the last several months with their properties being basically overrun. People parking in places they're not supposed to park, and it's gotten really crazy, and they haven't quite figured out how to deal with that, except that they started sending out information to people to send them to different trails that they might not necessarily have known about. A lot of people know about Mount Monadnock, and that place was apparently really crazy. So they were trying to get people to go to other of their properties to be outdoors. So I think it was a big problem in a lot of ways for a number of organizations that are running outdoor places.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And the U.S. Forest Service was in the very same situation up in the Whites. So absolutely. All right. Shall we move on? Other thoughts? Oh, Kara has something.
Not other thoughts on that, but I was with the moving on.
Okay. What do you got?
I have two questions. First, I think we need to congratulate Michele on the EPA Environmental Merit Award. It was nice to read about that.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you on behalf of all of us of being our champion. So my two questions. So I had an easier time keeping up on details when I staffed 5 subcommittees versus now that I'm on one. But in my work, I saw comment letters come from chairs and then letter was individually run by members by email for comments and kind of vetting. I've seen them come from a subcommittee, maybe that happened to go on a site visit. Do those get any less, are those any less effective? Are they given any less weight than a letter that comes from a meeting that has a quorum of the LAC? If the process is vetted by the LAC, obviously.
Right. Hopefully everybody is clear about those opinions and decisions and whatever are officially endorsed by the LAC versus, we didn't have a chance to have a meeting between now and when this permit comment was due, but here's the opinion of the chair or the chair and the couple of people who went on the site visit. Hopefully everybody's clear on that. But to my knowledge, and Jen, maybe you have more information on this than I do, but to my knowledge, if you send a letter, they're going to look at it and they're going to, and basically they're always looking at it for, oh, hey, we didn't know that, or that's an interesting thought on this particular property or in this particular situation. That's a good idea, or whatever it happens to be. To my knowledge, anything that gets sent in gets equal weight, no matter what an advisory committee, a subcommittee. Everybody is an advisory. You know, you don't get really the ability to say yay or nay, or even to truly say you must add, you know, green snow pro or whatever it happens to be. And in all cases, the permit reviewers are required to, you know, we have to follow the law. So there are certain things we can require because it's in the rules or in the statute. There are certain things that no matter who requests it, they can't do. But usually I think what happens these days is it's particularly helpful when advisory committees or subcommittees not only send their letters of comment to DES, but also send them to the applicant, because then the applicant sees what the letter is, and DES will forward those along as part of the comments. But you know, I know some of the LACs on this call have trained their consultants. I know you guys have done that. So they know that they're going to be asked to, you know, use wildlife friendly erosion control materials. And they know that they're, you know, so there's certain things they're going to be required to use or requested to use downshaded lighting, even though that's actually not really anything that DES can require. But some of you guys have done a really good job of training your consultants. So keep it up, keep asking, and guess what? You're changing the tide.
I think that comes up a lot, and people struggle. I've always felt maybe people struggle over it needlessly. My second question, and Jim might have to help me ask it because I don't even know the right terminology anymore, but we've spent a couple of meetings with, and my chairman on my screen is next to me, with Jim kind of trying to explain to us the opportunities to waive the right to review certain categories or projects. We haven't done that because we keep being able to think of instances in the waivable, and again, that might not be the right terminology, that we might want to comment on. So I wondered if other LACs are doing that. Are they waiving the right to review certain categories of projects? And Jim, maybe you could chime in and get that in the right term.
I'm not sure what kind of help you want from me, Tara, but as everybody knows, I'm totally against the checkoff box that says the LAC relinquishes. No, wait a minute. It waives their right to intervene. I think that is it's a shame that language even occurs on a form. I think DES should be encouraging comment from the LACs, no matter what the project is, but not to frame it as a waiver of a right to intervene.
Okay.
This is Dick Lutters of the Piscataqua River Local Advisory Committee. Just in response to that, we did vote to do that, put that waiver in place. But we still feel that we have the right at any time to not waive that. So, but we wanted to make sure we were not nitpicking in some cases, in some projects, which really didn't warrant a lot of scrutiny. And we feel that we still have the right to not waive something. So it gives us a little more flexibility.
Anyone else want to jump in?
What's DES seeing from other subcommittees?
Sorry, say that again, Tara. I missed some of that.
what are you guys seeing from other LACs?
I would say most of the LACs are in some way, well, I'd say a good number of them have taken a look at the list of statutory permit by notifications, permit by PBNs, permit by notifications, those types of projects, and said there are certain types of projects which are highly unlikely to impact our designated river. And a lot of these are projects that never used to even get to the LAC, but currently there are things like installing a boat canopy. The chances of that actually impacting a designated river are pretty slim. And so a lot of LACs have given their chair the right to simply sign off on those applications. The wetland rules with respect to LACs are currently in the process of being adjusted. And that's something I can go over, kind of what's being changed and where that stands right now if folks are interested. And it does sort of relate to this topic because some of those waivers, some of those permits that you've been seeing, things like docks and canopies, not big docks, but little docks, things that can be done under PBNs and that sort of thing. The proposal is out there right now to not have you guys review those anymore. But if that's something you guys want to talk about, I'm happy to do that. If not, we can move on too.
Tracy, Gene Porter, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can't see me because you haven't let my video in, but I would like to hear more about those changes that are coming down the.
Okay. Well, I have a little demonstration on let me pull up and share my screen with you guys, okay? Give me half a second. Actually, let me play the thing first. Okay, hopefully all of you, go to you, audience view. Yep, hopefully you guys are all looking at the definition of LAC jurisdiction. A bunch of years ago, and we're talking like 5 years ago now, DOT came to the RMAC and said, we need to do something about the fact that all stream crossing projects in designated river corridors require a standard wetlands permit in order to do them, including, a 12-inch culvert under a driveway for a dry stream bed that's dry, 90% of the year. They said the problem is because they require a standard permit, they cost a lot of money because an engineer has to sign off on them. The permit itself costs more money. And as a result, they can do 3 or 4 projects outside of a designated river corridor for the same cost of doing one in a designated river corridor, which meant that stream crossing projects in designated river corridors weren't getting done. The RMAC and DOT went back and forth for several years on sort of what made sense with respect to this. And they came up with a compromise that nobody was really in love with, but that's sort of the definition of a compromise. And what they said and what we've agreed to was that for stream crossing projects within 250 feet of a designated river, so very close to a designated river, and these are ones that would normally be statutory permits by notification, routine roadway notifications, things up to 48-inch culverts, nothing that would require something bigger than that anyway. If it would require a standard permit somewhere else, it would still require a standard permit. But for these smaller projects, these repair projects, some of that, if it's within 250 feet and it has a direct connection and it's a tier 2 or tier 3 stream, which means it's bigger than a drainage area of 200 acres, that it would still require a standard permit. But beyond that, if a permit wouldn't have to be a standard permit because of the type of project, it would not have to be a standard permit just because it's in a designated river corridor. So the RMAC agreed to this as the Rivers Management Advisory Committee that Michele is now chair of. This was a long time ago. This was before Michele was chair. So wasn't thrilled with it, but we said, okay, that's a good compromise because we don't want the stream crossings in designated river corridors to suffer. So that definition got written into the wetlands rules when the wetlands rules were changed about a year ago, back in December 2019. Unfortunately, what they did when they did it was they put a couple of the modifiers in the wrong places in the definition. So what we have now is this has actually been passed. This was passed last week, 2 weeks ago. Getting lost. September 25th. This is effective, and LAC jurisdiction means the authority conferred by our statute upon an LAC relative to activities within a designated river or river corridor, provided that for the purpose of routine roadway maintenance activities conducted under an SPN registration, PBN, or expedited permit, LAC jurisdiction shall be limited to activities located in or within 250 feet of a designated river where the surface water, that has a direct surface water connection to the designated river. Sorry, got lost in my reading. So for those of you who can see it, and hopefully this will work. Apparently, oh, there we go. I have a diagram. So for all other projects, and because this only applies to routine roadway projects, for all other projects, your area of jurisdiction is still a 1/4 mile. But for these routine roadway projects, which is culverts up to 48 inches that meet certain other requirements, the area of jurisdiction is 250 feet. But there's some conditions. If it's a tier 1, if it's a crossing over a tier 1 stream, that one doesn't count. So it's only tier 2 and tier 3 streams. So the ones that are within jurisdiction, tier 3 stream, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but tier 3 stream with a direct surface water connection to the designated river. That's within LA's within jurisdiction. A crossing of the designated river itself is within jurisdiction. The ones that are not within jurisdiction are a tier 1 stream crossing and also a stream lacking a direct surface water connection to the designated river, but just happens to be within 250 feet of that designated river. I don't know how many places that would actually occur, but if it did. So that's what has changed now already. The second part of this question revolves around which, no, Jean, I can't. That didn't come out quite the way it was supposed to be. The second change that is being proposed, and this is going to be reviewed by the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules on October 15th, is taking some of those PBNs, those SPNs that we never used to review as LACs, and those boat canopies and projects like that, and taking them back out of LAC basically saying LACs don't need to review these because they're very unlikely to impact the river. We did have some proposed legislation last year that would have exempted utilities, so this would go ahead and take care of that, so we don't have to deal with the legislation. But there are some other things as well that were included. So as it stands right now, the diagram that is up right now is the way it is right now. And then the diagram that I just added takes docks and utilities projects out of statutory permit by notifications. It takes most permit by notifications out, but not those routine roadway projects that are within LAC jurisdiction. Just those, actually, that's really the only change, is those two areas. So if it was an expedited permit before, you're still going to see it. If it was a standard permit before, you're still going to see it. If it was an emergency authorization, you were never going to see it. Anyway, so at least until it comes around to a regular permit. Routine roadway registrations, you're still going to see those. So that is going to be reviewed in week after next.
Yeah, and Tracy, if I may add to that, that's Michele Tremblay, and I guess I don't know which hat I'd wear when talking about this, but the legislation that Eversource requested that Senator D'Alessandro sponsored was backlash from this unintended change. And, you know, I think that we walk a fine line between making sure that we don't see the statute weakened, but also that the program is not so, you know, like gutted that it doesn't mean anything at the local level relative to permitting. And I know that a lot of people have called me about this, and, you know, some of them are kind of incensed about it, and they want, you know, kind of to see everything. But when the consultants or the larger corporations like Eversource complain, what happens is we end up with a bill like the one that Senator D'Alessandro sponsored in the last session, and that's going to start to pick away at a big way at the program. So I just wanted to say that it's a fine line, and it's hard to know exactly where the line is, but this is what ends up happening. So I don't know, Tracy and Jen or anyone, how they feel about that, but I have grave concerns. RSA 483 will, you know, be reduced to basically nothingness if we don't find that place to draw that line.
Michele, I agree with you that, you know, if we're going to have to fight it, I'd rather deal with it in the wetlands rules than in the rivers program statute, because it's a lot easier for us to say, hey, these are the things that we care about in rule and the things that we don't care about in rule, than it is to have that choice, that right of choice taken away from us. And I did, when we were talking about all this, you know, more than a year ago when this came up, you know, I sent out inquiries to all of you guys and said, hey, what do you guys think? And there were a couple people who spoke up and said, you know, yeah, we do want to see everything. But for the most part, everybody said, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we don't need to see. Let's focus on the big projects and the important stuff. And so that's the way we went when we were working with wetlands to put together this rule amendment.
Tracy?
Yep.
Tracy, this is Barbara Scully. I'm joined you by from the Ashwila. I'm on the phone because I am not able to connect for some reason via computer. But with these, you know, I think it's important that the LAC still need to know that these projects are happening. So not that we need to review them, but there's this whole issue of notification. And is that part of any of the legislation that we still could be notified of these projects?
It's certainly not in the in the legislation, but that is a question that I've been bringing up on a regular basis with the wetlands folks. And we're very gradually trying to improve both our access to wetlands databases and our ability to sort through those databases and figure out which projects are actually within the quarter-mile corridor and which aren't. It's still not as good as we would like, but it is getting better. And so our challenge with that is finding a mechanism to figure out which permits you should send and you should see and which ones are too far away and you don't care about. That is something we are continuing to work on. For any of you who have been in the wetlands shoreline query lately, the online query, you'll notice that it looks different than it did about a year ago. You'll also notice that in that query, there's this random blank spot where it looks like there ought to be another field. Well, that blank spot for the field is for designated river. And we're still working on the sort of background information necessary to fill that field in. But that's there for you guys. And the idea there will be that you can put in, your designated river, and even if it's the lamprey, which includes not just the lamprey, but the North and the Little and the Piscassic and so on and so forth, that all the ones that would be in your jurisdiction would then pop up. Along with whatever other search parameters you wanted to put in. And that would make it easy for you guys to simply say, hey, what permits are going on out there? Put in your river, put in the dates you're interested in, and just see what's out there. Unfortunately, we're still working on making that happen on the IT end of things. But it's in our thoughts, and that I think Barbara would help you a lot in terms of being able to say, what's out there right now.
I
Tracy,
kind of thought that was on there, but already that things were by river, but.
Well, there's a river field in there, which our newest river, the Warner, is not in yet. But the river field is one that is filled out by the applicant. And a lot of times if they're across the street from the river, they don't actually put that in because they don't feel like they're on the river. If it's a shoreland application, it's usually in there. But if they're across the street from the river, it's in your jurisdiction, but it's not necessarily indicated in that field. And that's why this other one would be GIS based and pull in. And again, it would not be just in your case, the Ashuela, it's a little easy because there's just the one river, but a number of the LACs are dealing with several rivers. So they would have several searches to do. So that's the idea there.
Tracy, that box in the permit query for designated river is there now.
Oh, is it? Last time I looked at it, it hadn't been, but I haven't really been paying attention.
And it's got the Warner River in it.
Okay. I'll have to double check and see how up to date that data is, because the other thing is we had a field there for a while in the old system, but I wasn't sure, but it was only getting updated quarterly, and then sometimes somebody forgot to do it, so it was not useful current data for you guys. So that's a good thing to know, and we'll follow up on that and see what the currency status of that is, if that makes sense. Thanks, Jim.
Tracy, can you send this Venn diagram or whatever you would call it to, well, I'd like to get it just to pass it around to my LIC members.
So the first part of it, the permit types currently reviewed, is actually posted on the LAC forum right now, and it is on page 1 of the permit review guidance document that is posted. As soon as we hear yay or nay from JLCAR and their review and approval of the additional proposed changes, we will update the permit review guidance document and send that out with the revised diagram. How's that?
Okay. So that, yeah, I guess that proposed, that's not really locked in yet, is it?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Hi, Liz.
Liz, Isinglass River. I have a question about the forestry notifications. It came up earlier this evening in the conversation about Milford, and we had a real problem on the Isinglass this year where it didn't seem, again, like you could do anything because it was a forestry notification, but we actually had loggers who crossed the Isinglass with their equipment, made a mess of it, were issued violations by the forest ranger, but we had no way of weighing in, were never notified, nothing, and feel very concerned that this kind of thing might be happening. Granted, we're a small river and the upper part of it's very wooded, but is there anything we can do about this?
I wish I knew what the perfect answer to that was. Does anybody have any, I mean, yes, we can get in touch with the forestry folks and say, hey, you know, you need to be doing this. If they were crossing that river, they should have had a wetlands permit. And right now, well, no, right now forestries are still exempt from your review.
I guess that's what I'm saying. Is there something we can do about that? Because just like the Milford case, they cut trees practically in the river. They ran their equipment through the river. It's so dry that there wasn't much river there, but that doesn't mean they didn't do a lot of damage. And, you know, it's possible that forestry notifications can actually affect designated rivers. And I don't know if anyone's thought about this, but it seems like a big hole that you wouldn't expect to be there until something happens. But
well, there's sort of two issues here. There's being told that the work is happening, and then and if it sounds like these folks being notified of potential work wouldn't have helped you anyway, because they were just going to run through the river anyway if they were cited for violations. You know, even if you have a permit to do, you know, what is permitted, if you don't follow it, there's nothing that just knowing about it is going to do to help. And that's just a matter of having enough, you know, enough compliance staff, both on our side, on the wetland side, and on the forestry folks side, to be able to follow up with stuff like that. So I don't know, do others have potential solutions to something like this? I wish I had a better one off the top of my head.
Yeah, Tracy, this is Michele Tremblay. The only thing that I can say on this one is that when I've made the calls, I know that compliance staff, you know, we've moved now from regulatory to enforcement. There's a couple of things. One of them is if there can be a clear document quality violation that followed chain of custody and can serve as proof, that's one way to approach it. The other is called wetlands like this and others. They've basically asked me to complete one of their complaint forms and take pictures. So essentially, you know, I'm not saying this is a great solution because I hate doing it, but you're essentially the kind of like the pawn. You're the front lines of doing the initial enforcement documentation, and then if they look at it and they think it's abhorrent enough, then they might you know, go out and make a call based on it. But that's the only way that I've been able to deal with it. And sometimes working with the town or the city's conservation commission adds a bit of weight to it. And some towns and cities have their own compliance staff that can weigh in to give it a little bit more, I don't want to say credence, because these are serious problems you're describing, Liz, but gives it a little bit more of a I don't know, it just has more muscle behind it, but it's time consuming for those of us. This isn't our day job. It's and I hate having my name on complaint forms. that's the way it has to be. And, you know, it's coming from the committee, so that helps a little bit. You know, I'm not the pain in the neck. It's the committee that's the pain in the neck. So it's not an individual, it's a group filing it.
Well, I get that, but it's funny, we were talking earlier about, you know, a boat canopy and whether or not an LAC really needed to know about it. A logging operation that's crossing a designated river is a lot more of an issue than a boat canopy, and yet boat canopies were something we were told about. So it seems like there's an opening there for doing something regulatory as well.
Well, we want to, you can work with your the corridor, and they should be receiving and wouldn't find of the cut, and that you know that there's a logging.
Michelle, we're having trouble hearing you.
Chairing my conservation commission, I used to kind of joke, and miraculously, none of them ever come with a wetland or stream or other. Yeah, it's uncanny without tripping over.
Michelle, I think, is everybody having trouble hearing you, Michelle?
Yeah, yes, I can't hear.
I don't think it's echoing. I think there's a lot of people that aren't muted. So it's me. That's the other way that you can get at it, if you can open up that side and have it reliably forwarded to the orator.
Tracy? Whoops. Yeah, Tracy? This is Jane Bowyer with the Piscataqua River Local Advisory Committee. And what about the timber tax laws? I mean, you can call on, is it Fish and Game, or who would it be if there's a violation of if somebody is cutting logging and they're not paying timber tax? I mean, those are usually the people that will be crossing the river, you know, without any permit.
My understanding was that was a local issue, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, so if this is happening throughout the state, then I guess you need to call, you know, I think it's the Department of, well, it's the DRA, and also the city department would be I don't know, would be the assessor's office, but tax revenues in the city. But I think because I have followed up on some issues where there are a lot of, you know, trees being cut and wetlands, and I think the timber tax issue in the department that you know, records timber taxes should be notified. So that could be another entity that we could use for this issue.
Okay. And I was going to say, Liz, one issue that we have is the forestry wetlands permits. Those were excluded against our will in statute back in 2016, I believe. So that was something we fought and we lost the battle on, that and some of the ag ones. So we did try with those. So I agree, it would be nice to know about them. But that is something we would actually have to open up in statute as opposed to rule.
This is Barbara Scully from the Ashwellet again. I would like to follow up on some of what Michelle was saying about compliance and filling out the complaint forms. I'm curious what other people's experience is with this, because on the Ashwellet we have at least 3 cases out there that have not been finished or completed. There's been visits to violations, but there's been no action taken. So it's very frustrating to be dealing with something well over a year and not have any action taken. And so going the complaint route doesn't seem to be too effective.
I'm going to say, Barb, and it's nice to hear your voice. I'm going to say that the response has been capricious, and I'm not sure what grabs attention, if it's geographic, if it's, you know, a particular thing. Like I've been going after a unpermitted beach on the Kentucky for years and can never really get anyone to do anything about it. You can see it from Google Earth. Other times, you know, someone might go out based on a phone call. I don't know what the rhyme or reason of it is, but it's very frustrating.
Agreed.
I'd like to pitch in here, if I could, about compliance and enforcement. I think they go hand in hand, and I've seen in my own community, I'm just a recent LAC member, so I haven't been that much exposed to it, but it seems to me that with the amount of interest, statutes, rules, there's not enough consideration by all the interested parties, fish and game, forestry. We've talked about, you know, the loggers crossing roads. Loggers have rules and regulations, and I've heard people say, well, who enforces those? A lot of towns don't enforce them, and they can. So maybe, as much as I don't like rules and regulations per se if they're unnecessary, maybe the legislature needs to take a look at all these means of enforcement and give some teeth or some push to the communities to pitch in, because police departments don't want to go out and enforce these things. Conservation commissions feel they have no authority. If they do, they'll go to a property owner in town and get lost and nothing will happen. So I don't have the answer. I'm just saying I can see from all the questioning here that there seems to be a real fragmentation of enforcement. You can't lay it on DES because they don't have the resources, and all the other departments are going to say the darn thing. Well, maybe the state needs to give some resources for enforcement, because if it doesn't, if things don't get enforced, they will, you know, loggers will continue to cross. A violation isn't going to mean anything unless he gets whacked, and I mean whacked hard. So the same thing with a property owner cutting down trees in front of a water body without a permit or just skirting around a loophole. That's what happened apparently, Richard, it seems like in your area. So that's just my observation. I don't have a total answer for that, but seems to be a monumental task to do, to get the state to maybe leading that, but I don't know who would lead that. State police, I don't know, but we need some strengthening of processes to enforce and who enforces, and, you know, make it a statute if you have to, because then towns will have to do it, or agencies will have to do it. That's all.
So,
Thank you, John.
Tracy?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a state legislator, and if individuals want to introduce an LSR regarding this issue, I'm available to, you know, submit some legislation. I mean, I've been around the State House for 16 years, and it's terrible because there's never any money for natural resources protection. Very, very little. And this is who we are. This is who, you know, New Hampshire is. So if anybody wants to help me, you know, draft some legislation, we have another, you know, 2-3 weeks, maybe a month to introduce legislation regarding this issue.
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate that. And that was John Mullen, who had been talking before, a former legislator.
Tracy,
Yes.
this is Gene Porter, Lower Merrimack. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, you can't see me, I guess, because you've got me blocked. My video's blocked. But a comment on the enforcement issue that I see quite a bit here in the Lower Merrimack River, where there's a lot of residential development taking place on farmlands along the riverfront on the east side of the river in Litchfield and Hudson. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Anyhow, there's residential development along the east side of the Merrimack River typically involves dozens, sometimes hundreds of new houses or condos being built up to about 250 feet from the river. Now, the shoreland rules make it quite clear that you're not supposed to be cutting view paths along all those developments, and if you do cut the allowed amount of trees, you're supposed to allow the shrubbery to grow up 3 feet. You're not supposed to cut below 3 feet. There's several new developments where they've cut it right down to the ground. I've sort of stopped submitting complaints to DES because this seems to be below the threshold of serious concerns. So I just bring that to your attention. That's another, that's not going to change unless there's more enforcement that takes place on shoreland clearing rules. Do you hear that from anybody besides me?
Yeah, Gene, I certainly understand. So, Jen, do you have any thoughts or comments on any of this, or you're not required to by any stretch, but if you would like to share any, feel free.
I don't know if you really want them. Certainly, compliance and enforcement is a struggle with DES. Lack of staff, lack of resources. My position was never refilled when I was transferred out of it at the end of 2018 now. So we have a compliance supervisor doing that position and also being a regional inspector. Certainly some things take more weight and are more of concern and a higher priority than other complaints that come in. I will say that if we do receive complaint forms submitted, we do enter all of those into the database and go through the process of performing a site inspection and doing research and going through the whole process of compliance and enforcement. As a citizen, you do have the ability to submit a confidential complaint. However, if you're submitting it under the umbrella of a conservation commission or an LAC, you typically don't. I know that comment was made earlier, and that's correct. So, Barbara, I know you had mentioned earlier some complaints on the Ashwalet that you're struggling getting, pushing those forward. I've actually been helping wetlands again with some complaint work in the last month, so I'm happy to revisit those with you and see if there's something I can do to help. We're also losing another compliance inspector whose last day is Thursday, so we're going to really be down employees. There's 2 in the Seacoast area, and there is 3 positions for the inland area of the entire state, 2 of which are not going to be, they're going to be vacant as of the end of this week. So we have 2 inspectors that are still employed and doing compliance on the Seacoast and 1 in the North region. The Lakes region is going to be vacant as of the end of this week, and southwestern New Hampshire has been vacant since I left, but primarily being done by Jeff Lacharzik, who's the compliance supervisor. So things are really backed up. And I can only imagine how frustrating that is for anyone.
So Jen, this is Steve Andrew from Upper Merrimack, LAC. You just anticipated my question to provide that perspective for everyone on the call, because I see all the job postings coming around. I know the vacancies exist, and for a state with 17,000 stream and river miles, it sounds like we have 3 inspectors. So everybody can do the math. That's 5,000 river miles apiece, and it's not a tenable situation. And the only way to get on top of this is to have more state, resources / funding and those positions filled. And even when those are filled and they're somewhat at capacity, I would suggest that the Land Resources Management Program is still horribly understaffed.
Yeah, that's a great point. There are 5 positions on the org chart to do compliance and enforcement. 4 have been filled, but now there's only going to be 3. You're right. And we receive upwards of 300, 400 complaints a year total. And the process takes a really long time in some cases to achieve compliance, whether we ask for after-the-fact permit applications to be submitted for those impacts that can be permitted, or we go the restoration route. There are appeals. I've had files open for several years, and I've worked doggedly on them. So they're never really ever achieved overnight, and it's a very long process, or it can be. But some are simpler than others, but you're absolutely right.
I'd like to chime in again on the enforcement, and I certainly have talked to some inspectors down here in the Seas Coast, and they are just swamped. And because of the COVID situation, the influx of residents, as you mentioned, Gene, upgrading or new projects coming in, that they're just moving ahead and the heck with compliance because they want to get it done. Yeah. In terms of adding people, certainly need to do that, but I think a more equitable approach is to spread out the enforcement to the communities also. I can tell you in my own town, nobody wants to enforce anything. So if the state can get resources to increase their enforcement bodies, we need to develop some legislation, Jane, to maybe give some teeth or some direction to the local communities. They don't want to do it either, but and that's going to be a little more difficult. What are you going to force a town to do? Well, we force a town to do about 90% of everything they do anyway through the state. So maybe we need to not only increase enforcement resources to DES, but give some teeth and some direction to communities. It's out there. It's just not in one spot. It's not easy. I can hear that it's not easy to get to and get enforcement done. And relying on the public is, in some people's minds, it's some of the public don't like that. Your neighbor, spying on another neighbor. I got to tell you, I just don't like it. So, but that's what has to happen sometimes. So, I think we need to take an all-inclusive approach in terms of the enforcement issue. That's a big one. That's a real big one.
You're certainly right, John, and we only know most of the time things that are reported to us, because we're not on a boat driving around the lake looking for infractions on every property. We just simply can't. So you're right. We rely on the public to be the first eyes and ears on the ground to report things to us that are of concern. And we do work really closely with local code enforcement officers that are sometimes also the first feet on the ground before they reach us.
Yeah, code enforcement is a mixed bag. Some do their jobs and some don't. And that they're at the direction of planning board and select boards. So larger communities have the resources for good code enforcement. Smaller communities don't. And that's where some of these violations are occurring. Water bodies run through smaller communities. People come in and do things they shouldn't really be doing, and they don't get caught by or inspected by code enforcement. So that's the multi approach of probably trying to get some more teeth, more direction to communities without costing too much.
I just want to make a final statement. It's just about 8 o'clock, but I think if there's an election happening, and I think if we vote our conscience and we vote a governor in that will hear our voice, it would be the Democratic choice. Sorry, I had to say
that. God bless you, Jane.
Another approach to this enforcement dilemma is way up front. Chasing people after they've done something wrong is really hard, as you've all discussed. But if you can get ahead of the problem, and I'm suggesting before a project is done on a shoreland, if you go to the planning board and get the planning board to understand that there are rules, clear-cutting rules along the shoreland that should be observed by the developer, and get the planning board to make that a condition of approval of the development project, it might have more success than trying to chase the people down after they've cut down all the shrubbery.
Gina, that actually is usually in a local permit says they have to abide by all the state permits as well. So
yeah, but if somebody, a LAC person, goes and says that at the planning board's review of the project, it might have more impact than just checking off the box on the permit application.
it's possible. So I am going to interrupt here. I just want to interrupt really quickly. It's 8:01, and I want to respect your time. I'm happy to keep going if people want to keep chatting, but I also, again, want to be aware that it is 8 o'clock and were originally planning on ending. So happy to keep going, but also if anybody does want to hop off at this point, I can see we will potentially sending around just a little summary of some of the topics discussed and maybe some of the follow-up that was planned or promised. So certainly happy to do that. But again, you guys, everybody, and I will happily stay on, but if you want to keep chatting about some of these things, happy to do that as well. Okay.
Yeah, I think that we've had a good discussion, and it sounds like we have some good action items related to these permitting issues and changes in rules. So I do not believe I can stay on much longer. I'm surrounded by cats giving me dirty looks, and I haven't eaten yet either. So I think I'm going to have to nod off, and I think another productive discussion can happen once perhaps, for instance, we have the AOT threatened and endangered analysis. We'll have your Venn diagram, we'll have some information, and maybe we can reply to those messages or use the LAC listserv and have discussions online, and then talk about maybe, do we want to have a follow-up call once we have that information?
We can do that. All right. Any last minute emergency items that anybody needs to bring up?
Thanks very much. This was terrific.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
for doing the.
I think it sounds like it was successful, and so certainly happy to do this again. So, and again, we'll follow up and follow up with some of those items, the timelier ones first, and see if we have need another chat session in the near future.
So where's the pizza and the soda and chips?
No, you don't see it? The guy just delivered it.
I don't see anything. And I don't need it either. I certainly would like it.
Wouldn't we all? Yes, indeed. That sounds really good right now.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. I think this was a great discussion. And as always, feel free to call, email, whatever you want. You can send a letter if you have any follow-up thoughts or comments. And again, that LAC listserv that Michelle mentioned, if you want to send everything out to all the other chairs, that is always available to everybody. And if you need to know what it is, we can send you out that email address again.
And it's nice
Thank you.
one. I've missed our gatherings, so for those of you who stuck it out, I am grateful. I hope that we get to see each other in the righted world soon, but otherwise I think we're probably going to end up with another call.
Yeah. Good to see you, Michelle. Thank you, Tracy. Jean, I appreciate your comments on the planning board. I think that needs some emphasis from conservation commissions to be more active in the planning board.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Right.
All right,
Good
have
night,
a good
everybody.
night.
Thanks, Tracy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.